It started like any other all-hands meeting, dull, bloated with buzzwords, and utterly devoid of substance. PowerPoint slides dripped with fake optimism, and the freshly hired CTO, a man whose LinkedIn brags read like a manifesto for tech bro mediocrity, paced the front of the conference room like a TED Talk preacher on Adderall. She sat in the back, as always, half listening, half bored, fingers dancing silently across the rim of her coffee cup, while her mind wandered back to the lines of code she'd written just that morning. Then he said it, that sentence, delivered with a lopsided smirk like he'd just won something. Just a quick reminder, he said, pausing with the kind of smug theatricality only a man who's never written a line of original code in his life could muster. As per your employment contracts, all code written during your time here, even side projects, belongs to the company. So, if you're coding on weekends, congrats, you're doing it for us. Laughter rippled through the room, mostly from the usual ass-kissers in middle management. A few exchanged awkward glances, but she didn't laugh, not even a fake one. Instead, she blinked slowly, like someone just slapped her but missed. Her heart kicked once, violently, before settling into a slow, boiling churn. Her face remained expressionless, but inside she was a live wire snapping against the edges of something dangerous. He didn't know. He couldn't know. The weekend project he'd just claimed ownership over was not some idle hobby or toy app. It was an elegant, feral beast built in silence and insomnia, born from frustration, molded in secrecy. A tool, a weapon, a system so intuitive and lean it made their bloated legacy codebase look like a corpse in a trench coat. It was her lifeboat, her vengeance, her exit strategy. And now this polo shirt buzzword golem just laid casual claim to it, like a medieval lord patting himself on the back for breathing the same air as the peasants who built his castle. She forced a smile. It didn't reach her eyes. So, she said, deadpan but sweet, if I knit a sweater on Saturday, does the company own that too? Or just the stitches that resemble loops? A few people chuckled. The CTO didn't. His eyes narrowed for a beat before he moved on, dismissing her with a wave of his hand like she was office decor that had learned sarcasm. She leaned back in her chair, the room suddenly far away. Her blood felt cold in her arms. She wasn't scared. Not yet. But something had shifted. They had declared war, and they didn't even know it. Because what she had built wasn't just code. It was proof. Proof that she was smarter than every person who had ever spoken over her in a meeting. Proof that she could rebuild the core architecture of the company from scratch. Better, faster, leaner. Proof that she didn't just belong here. She was the product. And she'd been quietly cloning it in her own vision while they were too busy planning beer pong Fridays and wellness Slack channels. Now, she was staring at the smiling face of a man who thought that a signature on a contract gave him ownership of her soul. She felt a new stillness settle over her. Not fear, strategy. The CTO had touched something he didn't understand. Worse, he had claimed it like a man licking his fingers after stealing someone else's meal. That smirk of his would not survive the winter, because if they wanted to claim her code, they could damn well choke on it. The office air changed before the press release ever dropped. It started with whispers behind glass doors, subtle calendar changes, too many VPs booking off-sites, and flying in from cities they normally despised. Suddenly the kitchen was stocked with better coffee, the cleaning staff doubled, and the CEO had that fake humble glow like a man who knows he's about to get monumentally rich by selling other people's work. She watched it unfold like a slow-motion landslide. In meetings, the tone shifted. Her technical insights were increasingly ignored, interrupted mid-sentence by suits who couldn't spell the acronyms she lived inside. We need to align, they kept saying, as if innovation was something you could schedule between lunch and golf. She started noticing the language evolve: team effort, shared vision, foundational work by everyone but her. The jokes were the worst. Hope you're ready to retire, girl genius, the head of marketing said one afternoon as she passed him in the hallway. He didn't wait for her response. He never did. They were circling, jostling for position like pigs in designer shoes, desperate to be visible, memorable, essential, just long enough to get swept up in the $150 million payout they were all pretending to be too humble to brag about. But brag they did. Over lunch, over beers, over Slack threads not so accidentally left public. She sat alone in a back booth during one of the mandatory celebration sinks, sipping warm Prosecco out of a plastic flute, while the CFO clinked glasses and toasted the team that made this possible, the same team that didn't know her name last quarter. And then the fracture, the demo video. It played innocently at first, just a clip in an internal email blast showcasing what we're bringing to the acquisition table. She almost skipped it, almost, but habit and paranoia made her click. And there it was, a block of logic tucked behind a modal window, a specific animation ripple she had spent 2 weekends fine-tuning, a function call signature she had named by accident after her childhood dog. No one else would recognize it for what it was, but to her, it might as well have been a bloodstain. They had lifted it. Her private code, her off-the-clock, off-the-grid, no company resources touched project, was now powering their acquisition showcase. With her name nowhere in sight, her stomach dropped. She sat very still, breathing shallow, heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. She rewound the video, froze the frame. There was no doubt. They didn't just copy her idea. They integrated her system into the pitch. And based on how slick the packaging looked, they'd been running it behind closed doors for weeks, maybe longer. No credit, no permission, no acknowledgement, just theft hidden beneath the smokescreen of corporate synergy. A laugh slipped out of her throat, dry, humorless, borderline feral. They had no idea what they'd just done. This wasn't a violation. This was a declaration. And if they wanted to dance in her code, parade it like a trophy they barely understood, she'd let them, because a pressure cooker doesn't explode the second you turn up the heat. It waits, quiet, controlled, until the lid buckles to be why the time the acquisition meeting appeared on everyone's calendars, cryptically titled Strategic Alignment Session Mandatory. The office buzzed like a beehive on fire. People wore their best sneakers, ironed their startup hoodies, and whispered about buyouts like kids trading ghost stories. Word on the floor was that final evaluations were coming. Equity would vest, and those who mattered would walk away with stock options fat enough to retire in Bali or buy Teslas they didn't even want. She should have felt something: excitement, dread, maybe pride. Instead, all she felt was a dull hum under her ribs, the kind that comes before an earthquake. Not fear, not quite, but the certainty that something was about to snap. Then came him. The CTO strutted into the dev bullpen that Tuesday afternoon like a man who thought he was the messiah of intellectual property. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves annoyingly cuffed at the elbow, too polished to be casual, too calculated to be cool, and held a printout of the company's IP clause like it was the Constitution. "Just so we're clear before Thursday's sit-down," he said, waving the paper like a substitute teacher enforcing bathroom rules. "Any code you wrote while employed here, on company time, company laptop, company caffeine, is ours. That includes side projects if they so much as breathed on a work email. It's all in the fine print." He smiled, smug as a man quoting laws he didn't write and wouldn't understand if they were tattooed on his arm. A few nervous chuckles. Someone murmured, "Makes sense." A junior developer pretended to read Slack, but his screen was frozen on solitaire. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She just stared at him, quiet, still, and deeply amused. Because if this fool thought a boilerplate clause gave him dominion over her mind, he was more deluded than she feared. He could quote policy all day long, but what he didn't have, what he couldn't steal, sign, or snatch, was comprehension. And without that, they were dancing on a fault line with a flamethrower. That night, she stayed late. Not out of obligation, out of curiosity. She spun up a sandbox instance, combed through logs, and ran silent audits through the dev tools they didn't know she still had access to. And there it was, blinking like a red light in the dark. Core components of the live demo were powered by her architecture. Not inspired by, not referencing. Built directly on top of her unpublished repo. Even the naming conventions were intact, variables she'd coined at 2 a.m. on her second energy drink. functions she traced with a pencil on napkins at her kitchen table. And she confirmed the quiet horror. If those lines disappeared, even temporarily, the front-end demo would crash. The internal tools would revert to half-functioning husks. Their live-pitch showcase would eat itself within seconds. She was the ghost in their machine, the fuse already wired, and they had no idea the countdown had started. The rage bubbled, but this time it had shape, precision, purpose. It wasn't just insult anymore. It was artillery. They had taken the one pure thing she'd built in the dark and wired it into their parade float. Fine. Let them march it straight into the bonfire. She backed up her logs, cloned the audit, screenshot the fingerprints. She didn't raise alarms. She just smiled at her monitor like it was a mirror reflecting something they'd never seen in her. Not a quiet girl in the corner. Not a team player. Not a cog. But the hand that built their illusion. And the one that could burn it down. The boardroom looked like it belonged in a movie about rich people getting away with crimes. Marble conference table, water bottles that probably cost more than her rent, minimalist art so expensive it had to be ugly on purpose. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city skyline. But the real theater was inside. Every seat filled. Laptops closed. Phones silenced. Postures aggressive. The room pulsed with the silent drumbeat of money about to move. Investors sat forward in their chairs like predators ready to pounce. Lawyers shuffled paper with the crisp, deliberate precision of people who bill by the hour and breathe contract law like oxygen. The acquisition lead, some silver fox type from the buyer company, clasped his hands together and nodded like a priest blessing a sacrifice. And at the head of the table, radiating smug self-satisfaction in a wrinkle-free blazer, sat the CTO. Her CTO, the one who hadn't written a single line of functional code in years. He began his little performance with a practiced breath and a crocodile smile. "Let me walk you through the core architecture that got us here," he said, tapping on the slide remote like he was conducting an orchestra. "The system you're acquiring, our flagship stack, is one of a kind. Fully scalable, modular, lean, and elegant. Built in-house from scratch." A few heads nodded. One of the VCs typed something, probably adding zeros to a mental valuation. She sat 6 seats down, partially shadowed by a structural column. No title slide bore her name. No introduction mentioned her. Her laptop was closed, hands folded neatly, expression unreadable. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because they didn't realize they were sitting on a grenade with the pin already pulled. The CTO clicked to the next slide. It was a diagram, flowcharts, and call stacks meant to look complex to the untrained eye. To her, it was practically a signature. There, dead center. A system node wrapped around a call pattern she invented on a napkin 2 months ago. He didn't even bother changing the structure. He didn't need to, she realized. He believed it was his. He believed that standing in front of the whiteboard while she solved the actual problem made him a co-author. That his voice was louder so it counted more. That the fine print in the employment contract turned ingenuity into something transferable, like a parking pass or a stapler. She studied him, how he moved his hands, how he paused for dramatic effect after buzzwords like proprietary framework and asynchronous balancing. He was performing the role of visionary so well, he might have actually started believing it. And still, he didn't know. He didn't know that without the personal libraries she'd built, the system would collapse. That the back-end infrastructure wasn't complete without her. That half the codebase was duct-taped together with logic that lived in her private repo and wasn't actually theirs to sell. They were parading a hollow shell, polished just enough to fool the room. She took a sip of the absurdly expensive still water, tongue resting behind her teeth like a dam holding back a tidal wave. She didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't even glance toward the screen as he explained her system like a man describing a country he's only seen on Instagram. Because this was no longer about credit. This was about timing. And once you light a fuse, you don't interrupt it mid-burn just to scream, "I built that." You wait. You watch. And when it goes off, you make damn sure everyone knows exactly whose hand was holding the match. It came in subtle. No warning siren, no dramatic music, just the soft click of a slide advancing and the dull shuffle of legal pads being opened. The buyer's lead attorney, a woman in a steel gray suit with eyes sharp enough to cut glass, stood slowly, adjusted her glasses, and projected a document onto the 100-inch screen with the casual authority of someone who has killed deals with a single red line. "Before we proceed with valuation finalization," she said crisply, "we'll need clarity on this clause." Click. The words glared back at them in black and white legalese. Section 14.2.1. Ownership of intellectual property developed during term of employment, including but not limited to any creative or technical project conceived, developed, or constructed, wholly or in part, by employees, regardless of when or where the work occurred, if said work is relevant to the company's business operations. Her stomach twisted. The air shifted. It was like someone cracked open the floor and let a draft of raw, ancient cold seep up into the room. Time slowed, not in the cinematic, cool way, but in the awful, suffocating way that happens right before a car crash. Because there it was, in writing, a clause that mirrored the very thing the CTO had bragged about in the all-hands meeting. And now it was weaponized, surfaced by a buyer's legal team, not to protect her, but to scrutinize her. The CTO coughed a soft chuckle. "Standard IP clause," he said too quickly. "Just legalese. Everything built during employment is company property. That's boilerplate." But the smile on the CEO's face had begun to wither, just slightly, like fruit left out too long. The lawyer wasn't looking at the CTO. She was scanning the room, slowly, intentionally, and then she said it. "We're seeing unique code architecture in the demo, design patterns that don't match your previous development cadence or team logs. Our analysts flagged it. Can someone walk us through the provenance?" Provenance. Her breath caught. That word. Not origin. Not build history. Provenance, like a painting being inspected for forgery. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because suddenly all eyes were moving. A whisper to the right. A darted glance from a junior VP. A pause in the CTO's mouth, like a man realizing he's been seen naked in a room full of telescopes. The silence was no longer polite. It was loaded. The CEO leaned forward, his polished nails tapping twice on the mahogany table. A sharp tick. An old habit. He forced a smile. "I'm sure our CTO can walk you through it," he said, but his tone cracked slightly on the word sure. She watched as the CTO's Adam's apple bobbed once. There it was, the first real fissure. Not in the deal, in them, because the buyer's team was suspicious, and the seller's team was nervous. And somewhere in the wires between the two was her. The ghost they didn't credit, the engineer they didn't notice, the woman they underestimated into silence. She felt the shift in the room like a change in barometric pressure. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. But inside, a strange calm took over. Her secret had always been her leverage. But now her silence was evidence. And every second she didn't clarify made it worse for them. The boardroom, once humming with manufactured confidence and curated charm, had turned into a cathedral of silence. No one shifted. No one sipped their water. Even the HVAC seemed to hush, as if the ducts themselves wanted to hear what the hell the CTO would say next. The CEO's voice wasn't raised, but that made it worse. It sliced the tension with the precision of a man who never needed to yell to dominate. His teeth barely moved when he leaned toward the CTO and murmured, voice low, clipped, venom-laced, "Explain this. Now." The CTO froze mid-breath, lips parting but offering no sound. It was as if he was buffering, still loading an excuse that hadn't yet downloaded from his internal server of bullshit. He reached for his laptop, fumbled. His hands, usually smug and performative, now moved with the erratic tremble of a man who just realized the magician's trapdoor opened under his own feet. I'm not sure what exactly," he began, voice too loud, too high. He paused, trying to recalibrate, but the damage was done. The stammer echoed, thick and pathetic. The buyer's lead counsel didn't blink. She just clicked her pen once. The acquisition exec leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. But he looked, for the first time, like a man calculating downside risk instead of growth potential. The junior lawyer leaned over and whispered something to a paralegal, who immediately began typing. The CTO's face went gray. "Look," he tried again, his hands twitching toward the screen as if proximity to code could prove ownership. "We've integrated a hybrid structure, some legacy systems, some agile builds, nothing out of bounds, just enhanced from team contributions. That's normal. That's industry standard." Nobody moved. And then, as if she were watching a slow train derail in real time, she saw it happen. The CEO's chair swiveled. He turned not to the CTO, not to the lawyers, to her. The room followed. Eyes she had lived beneath for years now dragged across the table like floodlights, landing on the one person no one had thought about for the first half of this deal. No one but the lawyer who spotted a fingerprint in the code. And now every stare said the same thing. Did you build it? Did you hide it? Did you save us? Or doom us? She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She didn't move a muscle. But inside she was laughing. This was the same man who had once emailed her manager to keep her from getting too opinionated in meetings. The same CTO who said she should stick to execution because vision was for people with stock options. The same executives who couldn't remember her last name unless they were attaching her to a sprint deadline. Now, they were hanging in silence, waiting for her to validate his lie. The irony tasted better than champagne. She turned her gaze to the window and sipped her water, slow and silent. Not out of nerves, but out of control. Because they didn't just need her code. They needed her silence. They needed her obedience. And in that moment, every man in the room understood, whether they admitted it or not, that the person they tried to bury had just become the only one who could save their multimillion-dollar acquisition. The CTO cleared his throat again, but no one listened. The room was no longer his. It was hers. And the best part? She hadn't said a word. The illusion shattered with the precision of a scalpel. Not loud, not dramatic, but clinical. Surgical. The buyer's legal team requested access to code provenance, and the room transformed. Laptops opened. Calls made. A flurry of whispered instructions flew down the hallway like tracer bullets. What followed was a silence worse than shouting. 10 minutes later, the lead analyst returned. Eyes locked on a tablet, jaw tight, voice calm like someone reading a death sentence in public. He didn't make eye contact with the CTO. He didn't need to. "We traced the architectural base of the demo system," he said flatly. "It originates from a private Git repo, not your enterprise trunk." He looked up. Authored by her. The room turned toward her again, this time like she was radioactive. He continued, flipping the screen for the CEO and lawyers to view. "Initial commits began 3.5 months before the contract amendment you referenced. Metadata shows it was built off-network. No company devices, no VPN access, no overlap. Fully sandboxed. Click. A timestamp. Her handle. Commit log. Dozens of them. Click. Notes scrawled in shorthand. References no one could fake. Lines of code signed in her style, her logic, her algorithmic fingerprints. It wasn't just provenance. It was proof of authorship. And then the final blow, the CTO's own name, appearing only after the company began preparing the acquisition, via a silent fork where he'd cloned her repo and tried to disguise it as internal innovation. The CEO went still, his fingertips clenched together, hard enough to blanch the knuckles. Across the table, one of the buyer's lawyers dropped her pen. No one said it aloud, but the math was obvious. Fraud, intellectual theft, deal risk, litigation. The CTO opened his mouth and closed it again. There was nothing left to say. She watched him shrivel, not physically, but spiritually. The bravado leaked out of him like oil from a cracked engine. He looked not like a man caught, but a man reduced. And in that shrinking silence, she felt something sharp twist inside her. Not satisfaction, not joy, something colder. Vindication, laced with despair. Because it didn't matter that she had built the thing that held their company together. It didn't matter that she had outperformed, outthought, outlasted. None of it mattered until they were about to lose money. Her genius only became visible when it could be itemized. Her code only had value once someone tried to sell it. Her name only returned to their mouths when its absence became a liability. She looked down at her hands. Steady, open, empty. She remembered typing those first lines of code while crying into a mug of stale coffee, wondering if any of it would ever matter. Now it did, but only because they got caught. And somewhere inside her, something old and exhausted finally broke. They didn't want her brilliance. They wanted the profits of her silence. Well, that silence was over. And so was their deal. By the next morning, the office had shed its tech startup swagger like a molting snake. Gone were the open-door meetings and performative transparency. Doors now stayed closed. Legal pads filled faster than whiteboards. HR stopped making eye contact. The deal hadn't died. Not yet, but it was bleeding out. And they were panicking. It started with an email. A clarification request from the VP of Operations, worded like a favor, soaked in legal subtext, framed with too many compliments. Then came the Slack pings, "Can we talk privately?" followed by the ghostly notification of a message being deleted seconds later. By noon, the real offers began. First came the CTO himself, hollow-eyed and oversmiled, sliding into her workspace like a bad memory. He leaned against her desk as if they were old colleagues just catching up. Never mind that 3 days ago, he had paraded her work in front of investors with her name scrubbed clean. "I'm thinking equity," he said, voice soft and trembling with polished insincerity. "Founders level. You sign off on the IP cleanly, we backdate the narrative. We fix this. Together." She didn't answer, just sipped her coffee like it had better things to say. "Plus a one-time performance bonus," he added. "High 6 figures. And a lead architect title. Remote optional. We can make you very, very comfortable." She scrolled on her phone. He waited another beat, then walked away. An hour later came the head of legal. Then the CEO's assistant. Then the CFO, the head of HR, the co-founder who had never learned her name but now summoned it like a prayer. Each came with a different flavor of desperation. Equity. Bonuses. Permanent WFH. Creative credit. Even a retention clause with golden handcuffs so shiny they practically jingled. One of them, clearly sent without approval, offered double the original offer in exchange for a quiet signature and immediate withdrawal of all external claims. That one arrived at 2:03 a.m., followed by a recall notice an hour later. She watched the offers pile up like junk mail on a porch no one visits. Click, delete, click, archive, click, ignore. Her phone lit up with unknown numbers. Burner lines. Texts from masked senders with corporate lingo trying to sound personal. "Hey, we've always appreciated your work. Don't let this get messy. It's fixable. You deserve to win here too. Let's find a path forward. One where you walk away rich." She laughed once. Low, breathy, bitter. Like a queen flipping through channels and finding nothing worth her time. Because here's what they didn't understand. She wasn't after money. Not anymore. They couldn't bribe back dignity. Couldn't buy back the years they'd dismissed her. Couldn't retroactively pay for every meeting she was silenced in. They thought her silence was a product to purchase. But it was a power. And it had already started working. By saying nothing, she'd cracked the spine of their story. By refusing their deals, she let suspicion bloom uncontrollably. No signature, no NDA, no redemption arc for the CTO. She didn't have to destroy them. They were doing it to themselves. And the longer she stayed silent, the more they unraveled trying to rewrite her into their ending. Let them sweat. Let them beg. Because queens don't explain. They wait. And then they burn. They thought she'd fold in the boardroom. They set the scene like a poker table. Tense, smoke-thick with pressure. One final pitch, one final offer. One last attempt to buy back the narrative they'd already lost. Everyone was there. CEO at the head of the table, CFO stone-faced beside him, HR clutching a red folder like it might stop a flood. The CTO didn't even look up, just stared at his hands like they might disappear if he blinked. The contract sat in front of her, pristine, freshly printed, bloodless, an NDA, a clarification of IP rights, a bullet-pointed list of executive gestures disguised as redemption. All she had to do was sign, and walk away with the kind of payout most people only dream of. No lawsuits, no headlines, just a soft, forgettable ending. She looked at the pen. She looked at the faces across the table, each one contorted by fear, arrogance, or both. Men who had once smirked when she spoke, who took her silence as compliance, who never once thought the person sitting in the shadows might be the axis they were spinning on. She didn't speak. She didn't reach for the pen. She stood. Chairs scraped. Heartbeats stalled. No one moved. She straightened her blazer, calm and unrushed, as if she were leaving a dentist appointment or skipping out on a meeting she'd outgrown. She walked to the door, heels soft against the conference carpet, the sound of everything not being said thundering behind her like an avalanche. She paused, hand on the doorframe. Only then did she turn back, just enough to let them see her face. That look, the one that said, "I was never yours to begin with." And then she left. No mic drop, no final speech, just silence, the kind that reverberates. By the end of the week, the acquisition collapsed under scrutiny. The buyer pulled out citing unresolvable inconsistencies. Investors panicked. Contracts dissolved. The CTO resigned in disgrace, his name scrubbed from press kits and LinkedIn endorsements alike. Lawsuits trickled in from shareholders. Whispers of fraud floated through Slack channels like mold spores. Internally, it was a wildfire. Externally, it was a funeral without flowers. And through it all, she stayed quiet. No tweets, no expose, no revenge tour. Just stillness, righteous, radioactive stillness. They tried to erase her, tried to own her, but all they ever owned was the rope she let them tie. And they hung themselves with it. Final reflection. They thought they owned me. Turns out, all they ever owned was the rope I let them hang themselves with. She walked away with no job, no stock, no severance package. But she still had her name, her code, her silence, her fire, and most of all, her dignity. Scorched earth behind her, wide open sky ahead.